Hello and welcome to episode number 14 of the Comixly podcast, the official podcast of Comixly.com. My name is Joseph. Today we are wrapping up our series of episodes on the Studio Ghibli movies. Previously, we've watched and then discussed My Neighbor Totoro, Princess Mononoke, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Spirited Away. Today we're wrapping up with Howl's Moving Castle, which is probably the funniest Studio Ghibli movie we've watched so far. It was a nice note to end on, comedic and a little bit more lighthearted at moments movie. It's a 2-hour movie, but that comedy really helped move it along at some points and made for a really nice viewing experience. We also get into at the end of our episode some thoughts about the 5 movies that we watched, our favorites, and kind of our takeaway about watching these movies and what we enjoyed about them. But if you want more in-depth thoughts about any of those, you can go back and listen to our previous episodes on any of those movies. As always, we wrap up our episodes with a couple of things that we're enjoying this week. Thank you for being here with us for this episode. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back with our conversation on Howl's Moving Castle after a short break. But this time, we're talking about Howl's Moving Castle. This is the last of our Studio Ghibli series, like our series of podcasts on the Studio Ghibli movies. So we're actually going to spend some time at the end. Just what are our favorites? Yeah, what are our favorites, right? Top couple, and then something that we both felt going into Spirited Away. I think you said it. You said you felt a little bit of fatigue watching these movies. And I think we want to talk a little bit about that. Because I think it was nice. We were able to watch this movie together, which was really nice. So I didn't
get as easily bored.
Yeah, right. I think there was I didn't sort of have that sort of hurdle to get over, start it and get going with it. But that was definitely there for Spirited Away. Even though I ended up liking that movie and this movie, this is a pretty solid movie too. Let's start with the beginning of that opening scene, right? So the opening scene is just you're looking at pretty beautiful Studio Ghibli pastoral view, right? And then this big steampunk mechanical monstrosity comes roaring over the hill, and just kind of what impression did you get seeing that right away?
I'm trying to think back to it because I remember we watched this part. I didn't watch this part with you.
Yeah, we watched these separately.
I guess my first thought was ooh, that's kind of ugly. The castle. I was like, that's not a castle. But then, I don't know. I didn't really think much of it. I was like, well, that'll probably be important later. Moving on.
Yeah. What about the way it's pretty... I thought it was pretty distinctive, right? So this is the 5th one we watched now, and I can't think of anything else that looks like that castle did in any of the movies. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I remember you said it almost looked like it was drawn different.
Yeah, it definitely looks different, right? And we were watching it with someone who pointed this out. I think this is the difference, right? Everything in a lot of Studio Ghibli movies and this one, right? Most of the animation, while beautiful and very pleasant to look at, it's very matte, right? So the colors are very flat and there's not a ton of detail, right? One of the things, with anime, and kind of that goes into Studio Ghibli movies, right? They communicate a lot of facial expression. They communicate a lot of emotion with the fewest amount of lines or details possible, right? But that castle is so highly detailed compared, right? Whenever it's in the scene, it is the most highly detailed thing in the scene. So it looks very different, right? And it has all these sort of different chimneys and smokestacks and little towers, and each of them move sort of wobble independently of each other. So it's very... Yeah, it moves very uniquely, and it's very highly detailed compared to everything around it, right? So it just really sets it apart from everything else in the scene. And I was just, you don't know what it is initially, but you at least understand that it's it's extremely important, right? Whatever that thing is, it's extremely important, right? Which you figure out why later in the movie, right? Why it is such an important thing. After that, I don't really know where we're gonna go next. Because I don't really want to summarize the movie, right? Because I feel like we say that at the beginning. We don't want to summarize it, and then we end up summarizing it. So, do you want to give us the broad strokes of the movie, Ange?
Yeah.
Because I think it can actually be summarized just in a few sentences.
I was trying to think of a haiku on the spot, but I don't think that's happening in this episode. But there's this girl, Sophie. I think she's supposed to be 19, right?
I think so, yeah. And
she works at a hat shop. I don't exactly remember a lot about the first 5 minutes, or because I didn't watch that with you. I watched it a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
She basically ends up getting turned into an old lady by the Witch of the Waste.
Mm-hmm.
And she leaves her hometown. And with the help of a scarecrow called Turniphead, she finds Howl's castle. And then she goes inside. There's a fire demon named Calcifer and a little boy. What is his name? Markle?
Markl. I think. Yeah, Markle, I think.
Markle? Yeah. So they're there. And Howl also is there. And then she's just kind of like, I'm your cleaning lady now. And Howl's like, that's not suspicious at all. Great. And then side note, a prince from a kingdom got kidnapped. And kingdoms are going to war, and all the wizards need to report to one king or another to fight in the war.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a very and Angela's being very vague about it because the movie is extremely vague about the war intentionally. We'll get to that, but it's intentionally very vague about who's fighting and why they're fighting and anything related to it, really.
Yeah, but then I don't know how to describe it right with the witch lady. When they go to the palace and see what's her face? Solomon?
So the government Solomon, I think. Solomon. The government wants all witches and wizards to report to fight in the war. Howl has seen the war up close and doesn't want to do that. The government sort of won't let him, right? So they start chasing him down because he's one of the more powerful wizards, right? They want to use him for their side. And Howl has to grow up, right? In both a metaphorical and a physical sense. Howl has to grow up, and he's running away from these people who are trying to attack him. He has to grow up and confront them. And at the point at which he does that is kind of when the movie ends, right? He confronts it, he confronts the thing that's keeping him as a child. He sort of reconciles with Sophie and the Markle and the people around him, and then the war magically ends, and then the movie ends, and everything's happy. So it's very much a tale about growing up and the difficulties of that. Would you agree with that? I would struggle to what kind of needs, right? Because theoretically, right, this is, the war needs to end, the war needs to end for the movie to stop. But the actual mechanics of what causes the end of the war is extremely vague throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, it was just the prince is back because the prince ends up being Turniphead.
Yeah.
Sorry, I spoiled it. Also, I was looking this up because I was trying to find Lady Solomon. That's her name. Do you know that you watched The Hunger Games, right?
Yeah.
You know Peeta? Josh Hutcherson? He voices Markle.
Oh, he does.
Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
We got Batman being Howl.
Batman's Howl. Well, Christian Bale doing his... I don't know if the first Batman movie had come out yet, but doing his a very good Batman impression at times. So yeah, those are broad strokes of the movie. I don't know, what kind of stood out to you? That's kind of what I think this conversation, just what stood out to you? What do you think this movie was about? What did it communicate to you? Where do you want to start?
I really liked this. I noticed that there was we watched this in the dubbed version.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my first movie I saw in the dubbed version. And it kind of made me wonder, like, because I was really entertained by this movie. There seemed to be a lot more humor. And I don't know if that's just because there was humor in this movie, or maybe, like, things just translated in, like, English, like, were funnier.
Yeah, so there's a scene, I think the most humor, right, the funniest point of this movie, right, is there's a scene where Howl, right, he's been summoned by the government to go fight in the war, and he doesn't want to do that. He's running from his, right, from challenge or confrontation, as he always does. And so he gets Sophie to, who, you know, looks like an old woman. He gets Sophie to go to the castle in his place. And so as Sophie's going, right, she's walking into the castle, and she's quite old, so it's hard for her. Plus, she also has to carry this dog up the castle stairs, so she's really struggling. It's really hard, and there's these huge stairs. But the Witch of the Waste is also there, and she's a huge woman. She's tall, she's wide, and she's struggling to get up the stairs at the same time that Sophie's going up them. And there's this really funny back and forth as they're moving up the stairs, where Sophie's not berating her, definitely not berating,
teasing.
but just sort of teasing, teasing, chiding her for not really struggling to make it up the stairs. And I think it's definitely one of the funnier things I've seen in one of these movies. But you're wondering if that comedy plays as well in the Japanese language version.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So we watched it dubbed because we had been reading a lot that day, so we didn't really want to read any more subtitles. But I thought the dubbed version was pretty good. Did you?
Yeah, I thought I would be, like, super distracted by the dubbed version. Like, I thought that, like, the voices wouldn't be, like, good.
Mm-hmm.
But that was really good. Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, and so this movie came, right, Spirited Away was 2001, this movie was 2004, and I mentioned last time that I watched about half of, I was switching back for Spirited Away between the subbed version and the dubbed version, and they did a really good job with the Spirited Away dub version, getting the emotion of the words and the scenes, being able to capture it in the way that the characters' faces were expressing and the way their lips move, and having, like, the lip movement, which was drawn to match Japanese language, be able to accommodate an English language audio track. So they did a really good job with that. I don't think they did as good of a job as Spirited Away, but it would be interesting if you watched, even if you just watch that scene, right? Does that scene on the steps play as well in Japanese language? I think that'd be really interesting to hear if that does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this one, definitely, because I remember we talked about it with My Neighbor Totoro too, right? Just watching the dub version just felt wrong with that movie. Just the way like the expression and the way the actors' voices sounded for that one, it felt wrong. But this movie was pretty solid in that sense. Let's move on to, I guess, right, let's spend some time talking about Howl. So he's a wizard. He has a very dirty house.
He has a moving castle. Was there a point when you, like, figured out what was going on with him, or did it take until, like, the very end when they finally said what was going on with him? I mean, I kind of, like... You mean going on with him, like, with his heart and stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, mostly, but there's, like, why he is the way he is, right? Because there's these scenes very, like, I guess you go into a castle, right, and it's, like, impossibly dirty, right? It's so dirty. You're like, you know, if he's, like, magic, why doesn't he just clean it up? Because he does that later in the movie, right? So it's, like, It's impossibly dirty. He doesn't seem to take care of himself very well as far as, like, eating. You see his bedroom at one point, and it's full of toys and very shiny things. Like, it's full of just toys and shiny things. And a bed. That's it. There's no room for anything else. And the bathroom is like the grossest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
In a very colorful way, but it's still very gross. And he's also very impulsive, but he doesn't know how to deal with his emotions, right? There's the scene when he What's happens? Why does he get he starts oozing goo from him? I forget why that starts happening.
This is when Sophie cleans up the bathroom and messes up his potions, and it makes his hair orange. And he says, I was looking at this quote, "I give up. I see no point in living if I can't be beautiful."
Yes, he's very Howell's very melodramatic. And he doesn't want to live anymore because his hair turned a different color, and he sort of slumps over.
Because he turned into a ginger.
His hair turns a different color, and he oozes like green goo, and so Sophie has to drag him up to, I forget if she drags him upstairs to his bed or the bathroom to get to bed to get him to stop, right? So yeah, right. I guess did any of that seem weird or out of place, or you did like?
I mean, I feel like this, compared to the other Studio Ghibli movies, is definitely the most playful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because even My Neighbor Totoro, you expect it to be pretty playful. It wasn't like this, you know? I was never laughing, you know?
No, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess My Neighbor Totoro is cute, and you're sort of, there's moments of, wonder, but I think playful, and I wouldn't describe it necessarily as playful or comedic in the way that I would with this movie. Because there is something, the scene when he's, oozing the green stuff, it's ridiculous. It's so, it's weird. You get what you're trying to say, but it's a weird way to convey it. So, for me, seeing all of that stuff, I was wondering, what is, and there's also, he can turn into a bird, and he sort of leaves the house to go to mysterious places and come back, and you don't really know where he's been. And I guess I was wondering what was kind of going on for him, but with him. And we learn at the end of the movie that he has this little demon named Calcifer who makes the steam that keeps the house moving, right? The house is run by steam. And we learn at the end of the movie, this is kind of where it ends, that he accepted. Calcifer is a star/demon, or stars are demons. I'm not sure which way that goes.
Me neither. I don't know.
But he accepted Calcifer he sort of took Calcifer in, and in exchange had to give Calcifer his heart, right? So he took Calcifer, who has a lot of power, right? Howl's one of those powerful wizards, and that power seems to come from Calcifer, but in exchange he had to give up his heart, and that seems to have frozen him as a young child, right? As a boy, right? Which is why he's, I guess if you want to generalize, why he's messy, right? But more broadly, right? It's why he seems to struggle with his emotions. It's why he sort of struggles to connect with Sophie, or at least communicate how he feels about her. To communicate how he feels about her to her, and also why he's struck, right? I think we're supposed to understand, right, when he sends his grandma to go handle his business, right? It's like sending your mom to go talk
to you out of school.
Yeah, I was just saying, go talk to your teacher, your principal, right? Go talk to the authority figure you don't want to talk to, right? He's stuck very much in these childish patterns, right? He's a very powerful figure, but he's stuck in these childish patterns. But I don't quite know, I guess I don't quite know what changed for him at the end, right? Because at the end, he lets Calcifer go and he takes his heart back, but I'm not entirely sure, what changed for him, right? What did he learn? Do you have, I don't know, did you have any insights when you were watching about that?
No, because, it seemed like he got his heart back and then everything was just fine. And, I was also confused about, what point did he decide that he, liked Sophie?
I think it's probably...
Or is it because, did he always like Sophie because of, that weird thing where, she's in the past?
What do you mean?
Because, when she goes into his past, she's in his childhood, and she's like, look for me.
Oh, yes, there's that.
So, I was always wondering, was that real? Was that, an actual... Did she, go back and actually, did he have that memory? And was he... Because I remember the first thing he said to Sophie at the beginning of the movie was, I've been looking everywhere for you. And I've just been reading around, and people are like, oh my gosh, he said that, And, I've always wondered, is it, did he actually remember that? Or is that just something that, happened and didn't really exist after it happened.
I think that's definitely possible. I think that's definitely one way to read it. The way I was reading is, do you remember when I forget what, he comes back at some point and he's wounded, right? He's really, really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes back and he's in his bird form and he can't change back to a human, and Sophie goes up to his bedroom and she goes down that tunnel to sort of find him.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget exactly, right? She encourages him, like, you have to go do... I forget exactly what she encourages him to go do. I don't know if it's... She might encourage him to go talk to Solomon, or if it is to... I forget if it's to go talk to Solomon or they know that the village that she came from is going to be bombed, and she encourages him to go do something about that. I think it's one of those two things. There's that scene shortly after that where he rejuvenates the house, right? That's where he uses his magic to clean up the house and sort of fix everything. And he takes Sophie to his childhood home where he shows her all the wildflowers, and he's like, this is where I spent all my time. This is a really happy place for me, right? He seems, the way I read it is like, that is when he sort of understood that he could trust her and that she had his best interests at heart and could, I don't know if it's a love, but she, maybe more like a love like the way that you love a friend, but that she cared about him and that he could trust and like care about her in return without getting hurt. That's the point when I saw it switched, right? Because it's like a very sudden switch, right? He goes from being very moody and sullen to that scene, and then it barrels pretty quickly towards the end from that point.
Yeah.
There's a scene where some airships attack that field, and he has to go deal with that, and then he has to go deal with the war finally. And again, like, the war is super vague, so I'm saying deal with the war, but he just like he cannot stop them from bombing Sophie's village, right? And Solomon is sending people after Sophie and after him. Sophie takes Calcifer out of the house. It collapses. That's when she goes back into the house to have the vision. But that at that point, that is when the Witch of the Waste figures out that Calcifer has Cal's heart, and she takes it from Calcifer. She's gonna, she was in love with Howl at one point, so she's gonna use it to make Hal fall in love with her. Sophie talks to the Witch of the Waste, convinces her to give up the heart. Howl shows up, and Sophie gives his heart back to him. He takes it, and he gives up the power from Calcifer, but he, stops being a child, I guess, and then Sophie's old age curse is broken, although her hair does stay gray or white. But Cal is sort of, I keep saying Howl is returned to normal at that point. And then once that happens, instantly the war ends. Once Howl returns his heart back to inside of himself, the war ends.
The war ends because Solomon is watching them and is like, well, I guess the war is over.
Yeah, it's literally just her in a crystal ball being like, the war is over. So we'll get to that in a sec. But so yeah, like, there's something in there, and I don't know how strong it is, right? Because I think just the different interpretations that we have about it, right, maybe minimize the impact, right? Did he change because he had that vision from his past, or did he change because he really cared about Sophie? I don't know if the movie offers a really strong answer to that one. I don't know. Do you feel that it does?
No, because I always thought that, like, that flashback, Howl was like, I thought that was for more like Sophie's experience, not Howl's experience.
What do you mean?
You're talking about he sees the vision of, like, when he's young and stuff?
No, Sophie sees that, right?
Yeah.
No, so your thought was like, how the thing that prompted Howl to change was Sophie
getting his heart back.
Well, no, but like, yes, but so if you're right, did he go looking for, right, early in the movie he says, I've been looking everywhere for you.
Mm-hmm.
Was he looking for Sophie because he wanted to get his heart back, or was it just like...
That's what I was asking earlier.
Okay. Well, okay, do you think the movie... So I'm saying, because that's, if that's true, right, if Howl's looking for Sophie, then he knows she's important in his life, right? So I guess either way, right? If you're correct, right? Howell, something had been changing in Howell, right? That he wanted things to change in his life, maybe. But I'm wondering but it's like this magical thing, right? He had this premonition that there was this thing he needed to go do. It ended up with him getting his heart back, and I'm wondering, is it that, or is it that he met Sophie and she sort of changed the way that she changed the way that he felt about the world and felt about other people?
Probably the second thing.
You think this?
It was lot, maybe. But I think the second thing.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if the movie has a strong answer for that, but you can look on the internet, and I think you could believe either thing that you want, right? Because I didn't think about that. That is the first thing you hear him say is, I've been looking everywhere for you. Moving on, let's talk. One thing I thought was really beautiful about this movie, I want to know what you think about it, is I thought it showed aging, right? I think in a lot of movies you see aging as sort of horrible, right? And difficult. And how did you think this movie presented aging?
Well, so you sent me that article to read.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked, I think, because, Sophie changes from age to age, it feels like. Or she gets, older, and then she gets younger, and then sometimes she's old again. And it was, a bit confusing. Because, at first I was like, did the animators just, were not consistent?
They got a little tired.
I was like, that can't be right. But in the article it said that, she would get older when she would become less confident.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even as we were watching the movie, we were like, oh, she's just standing up straighter, right? Even if it wasn't visually, sometimes she was more hunched over and sometimes she was standing up more straight.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. It was an interesting way to show how Sophie, her character was changing.
Right. And how old she appears to be, or how stooped over versus how if she's standing up quite straight and appearing quite young, or if she's a little bit more stooped and appearing to be quite a lot older. It's constantly going back and forth, but it seems tied to these moments, right? It seemed, right, there's the moment in the castle, right? She's standing up to Solomon. Now I'm forgetting how we're going to say it. Solomon on behalf of Cal, right? And she's quite young in that scene, right? I don't know if she's necessarily powerful, right? But she feels powerful because she's quite emphatic that the war is not good, that it shouldn't be, is something they shouldn't be doing, and that Howell's not going to take part in it, right? So she's very confident. She feels very powerful in that moment. And there's also, right, just even moments, right, or other, when she's having more tender heart-to-heart moments with Howell, she appears quite young in those moments as well. And so, I don't know, does that say, what is that? That says something to me. Does that say anything to you about when she appears older versus when she appears younger?
What do you mean by say something?
Well, so I think something that happens in a lot of media, right, is we've sort of, and this doesn't just happen with old people, is, this is a fault of how a lot of media isn't the representation is not broad, right? I think we see a lot of old people as not really having very complicated interior lives, right? They're just kind of, maybe, the emotion that maybe most often defines them is just being bored and tired, right? They're in a nursing home, or they're in the corner of the living room. They live with their family, right? But I think this movie shows that Sophie, even though she is an old person, right? She got turned from a 19-year-old into a 90-year-old. So she appears to an old person, but she does not. That is not the way that she thinks of herself, right? And I think in those moments when she's sort of expressing how she's feeling, right, whether that's powerful or caring or whatever, right, that is when her age starts to go away, right? And she's just Sophie as we saw her in the beginning of the movie, right? She's not old Sophie or young Sophie, she's just Sophie at that point. So it's, I don't know, to me I was kind of oh, it's that, it's such a cliche to say that age is just a number, right? But I think this movie's kind of it's showing us something a little bit something kind of like that, right? Where it's the feelings and the emotion and what that person is doing is more important than like if their skin is quite wrinkly or if they're stooped over, right? Or any of those things.
Yeah, no, I don't have it. You say all the things, and I don't have anything to say.
In with the things, Edge. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know. Do you agree with about the like how old people are often represented in movies though? Like, I don't know. Did this feel new, or did it feel like a different representation of aging than you normally see in stuff that you watch? Or
I guess to me, not so much. Because I still saw it as like, I guess I didn't really notice her like acting any like stronger or different when she was like an old person versus when she was being portrayed as a younger person.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I like where you're coming from.
Well, I think, I don't know, because she does have quite a lot of, like, I don't think it's like the amount of activity, right? Because when she's cleaning up the house, right, she's like running everywhere, and she has quite a lot of energy when she does it. So I don't think it's so much about like the energy or what she's doing. I think it's more about her emotions are when the age starts to go away. But at the end of the movie, right, even when the spell is broken and she looks, or, she appears 19 again, right, she still has her gray, white hair, right?
Yeah.
And because she says something at the beginning of the movie about how she always felt like an old person.
Yeah.
She seems to, and so I wonder, I don't know, I guess they, maybe, I don't know, maybe she's, they say like some young people are like more mature. Maybe that's communicating that. Moving on. I have like just one thing left that I want to talk about. So before we get to that, is there anything else you want to hit, Ange? Any themes or anything went on? Any characters?
I was thinking about, because I did watch up to the point where like they met Calcifer in the sub version, and I felt like the way that the voice acting for like the English version versus the Japanese version was like, I thought it was pretty different. Because like I feel like in the English version, the Calcifer, like his voice makes it like sound like more, not like edgy, but more like sassy. You know?
Is this in the English version or
in the English version? Whereas in the Japanese version, I feel like the voice was, I don't know if like childlike. It was like still playful, but it wasn't like as like sassy.
I think No, I think you're right. So Calcifer in the dubbed version is voiced by Billy Crystal, he's quite old now, but he was a really popular stand-up comedian, right? So I think he's definitely, that Calcifer, I think, in the dubbed version is just comedy, right? He's just going for the funniest, what's the funniest way to say this line every single time? Basically every single time, right? Calcifer doesn't have a ton of emotional moments. He has a few, but they're not super, I would say they're not super strong emotional moments. Maybe they are the Japanese or the Japanese voice version. But I think you're like, sassy, and it's just Calcifer's just straight comedy the whole time.
Yeah.
Which is, right, like you said at the beginning, is nice because these Studio Ghibli movies aren't often funny, but it is very, very different. All right. Last thing I wanted to get to is something I was thinking about, and I don't know if you're a little bit younger than me, so this might not be something that stood out to you so much, but this is Spirited Away was 2001, right? So that movie was made before September 11, right? It was like, I'm not sure exactly. I think it was released at the end of 2001, so it might have came out afterwards, but it was made before that, right? That movie was not in response to that at all. But Howl's Moving Castle is November of 2004, so 3 years later, right? Definitely September 11th had happened. The U.S. had invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. So that was definitely a huge thing going on in the world. And the war that goes on in Howl's Moving Castle, especially compared to something like Princess Mononoke, right? Where it's about a war, but the war is presented in the war is very complicated in that movie, right? You're understanding what both sides are doing, and you're understanding why the leaders of both sides are doing what they are. Whereas in this one, the war is just entirely nebulous and seemingly random the entire time, right? No one's ever explaining why it's happening in any case. And even the characters just say it should stop because it's bad, right? That even the people who don't want it to end can't give a complicated reason why. And that sort of brought to my mind the U.S. invading Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Because we're technically, right, we're at war in those countries right now, right? Those, troops have been reduced and pulled out, but technically we're still at war at those countries, right? Those wars, even though we don't think about it, even though it's not something that's like on the news every single day, it used to be, right? It used to be on the news all the time. But technically those conflicts are still ongoing, seemingly in perpetuity, right? 18 years, I was going to say 20, like 18 years after they started, they're still happening, right? And even though we're not thinking about them, right? The people that live in those places, the soldiers that are going over there are definitely thinking about it, but it's something that's a little bit more abstract, and we're very removed from it because I think it's really hard it's something that's something as serious, even though it's something so serious, the fact that it's just ongoing for 18 years, and we've all sort of, not all of us, but at least for me, we understand that it's a war that was not started and was not continued for the right reasons. It's a really hard to be fully invested in caring about it all the time. That's really, really hard because it is so abstract. And, if I was thinking like for the people that were living in the town, right? The people like living in Sophie's town, right? If their leaders and the people involved in the war can't articulate what it's about, and this movie doesn't care to tell us what it's about, it has to be just as abstract and random for them until, at the end of the movie, right? Until their city is being bombed and destroyed. So I was thinking about that. I was like, I don't know if the parallels are perfect. And then I started to do a little bit of reading, and something that Miyazaki mentioned when he made this movie was this is like the way that the U.S. invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan was something that very much was on his mind when he was making this movie, right? In the way that it seemed to be, right? It was supposedly because they had weapons of mass destruction and the U.S. was going to go in and get rid of them. And then it was because they were going to find Osama bin Laden. And then it was because they were going to remove Saddam Hussein for power. And then it was because they needed to like stabilize the region, right? Because of ISIS or other groups who had sprung up to get the U.S. out of the country, right? Because they didn't want the U.S. occupying them anymore. And, I think it's really interesting that we get to see in this movie, right? Because we're so, America as perpetrators, as a country that's directly involved in the war, it's hard for us to understand how do other countries who have no involvement and just see what we're doing, how do they feel about this war, right? And so, Miyazaki, right, as a person living and working in Japan, from his point of view, this war seems abstract. It seems without ideology, and it's, something that is occurring at the whims of leaders who are telling people what to do. People are dying, people are feeling the effects, but they have no direct involvement in it or anything. So I think it's I think it's kind of a powerful statement about war in that sense, right? I don't know.
And what's kind of like, not funny, but like ironic, is like, because I guess I see it as in like, this movie is sort of like, not to like, maybe, I don't know if like to call out like America or whatever, but like it was definitely like a critique of like what was going on, right? And
no, yeah, absolutely.
And then it got nominated for an Academy Award.
Yeah. No, did you read, I was looking at the Wikipedia, right? And it says in there, he worried that people in the U.S. wouldn't like it because it shows, if Solomon is in that, the country that they're leading is the U.S., right? They're waging a war for they're waging a war that's killing, lots of people and destroying things for no reason, right? Like, and if that's the U.S., yeah, what does that say about us? He was worried that the U.S. people in the U.S. wouldn't like it because of that. Exactly. That's a really good point.
But they did. But I also wonder maybe people who are watching it here didn't think too much on that.
Yeah, that's the one thing I was going to say, right? I think it's really easy to miss that and not think about it, right? Because I think the war has to be abstract. If you're trying to make that point, then the war does need to be abstract and random. And it ending suddenly is all part of that, but I think it is quite easy to miss that if you're not thinking about it, right? And I would, people probably weren't. I would totally agree with that. Anything else?
No.
Okay. We watched 5 movies, right? What we watched? We started with Totoro, My Neighbor Totoro. We watched Princess Mononoke. What was the third one?
Kiki's Delivery Service.
Kiki's Delivery Service.
Spirited Away. Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah. All right. Give me your top 1. I think that's maybe more interesting than like a 1 through 5. What's your top 1?
This one.
This one? Why this one?
It made me laugh.
Okay.
and simple.
Okay. It's just because it made you laugh?
Also, I like the music. I noticed that, like, there was 2 songs that had, like, actual lyrics. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the other... I don't know if there was any, like, lyrics in the soundtrack, in the other movies. I just thought that was interesting. Something that I noticed.
Would your opinion... If you watched the Japanese language version and it wasn't as funny, would your opinion change?
Then it would probably be My Neighbor Totoro.
All right. So you really did appreciate the comedy in this one?
Yes.
Okay. Nice. That's cool. Yeah, it was... I think that definitely made watching... That probably is what contributed to making... a little bit easier of a watch, right? It's a 2-hour movie, so it's a little bit long, but I think a lot of that went by pretty quickly, especially that first half where more of the comedy is situated. That probably helped make it a little bit of an easier watch. I think my number 1 is still My Neighbor Totoro. I part of me wonders if that's just because that's the first one I saw, and if I had seen Spirited Away first, or if I had seen this one first, if they would be my favorites. But there's some randomness in this movie too, right? We have Turnip Head, you have that weird looking dog, what else? You have the castle is very weird and random. There's some weird, there's kind of a weird steampunk world a little bit. You have some of that in here, but Totoro, you have the cat bus, and you have the Totoros themselves. I don't know, just I think about like the expression on that Totoro, and that's the thing that makes me laugh, the way he has those like big eyes or whatever. So just the like the wackiness of that movie, but also the way that is part of the way that is directly tied to what it's like to be young and to be out discovering things, and how you kind of feel the way that when you're young and you're out in the woods or you're out in a new place and discovering how it's magical and scary, but also just how normal life things can be scary and overwhelming as well. The way that movie blends all of that together with really, really good music, and I still think that's my favorite of them to look at. Overall, just the way that the nature and everything is depicted in that, right? There's some awesome things to look at in Spirited Away. There's some awesome things to look at in this movie. My Neighbor Totoro, I think I still really like how all of the scenery and everything looks in that one the most.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Anything else to add, Ange, or you want to go to the next part?
Let's go to the next part. Let's take a quick break first.
We will take a quick break.
Back. Things that have been interesting for us this week. I'll start off. Over at the start of winter break, I told myself that I would read lots of books, because I used to read lots of books when I was like in grade school, and then once I got a phone, I'm sorry to say this, I rarely picked up a book ever again. So I was trying to get back into it. I bought a bunch of books with the intention of reading them over winter break. I read one, and it's called All You Could Ever Know. It's by Nicole Chung. She's a Korean adoptee, and it's just like it's her memoir. And as a Chinese adoptee, it was a very interesting read. Mm-hmm. And if any of you guys are listening and are a transracial adoptee, or are just interested in like knowing what one adoptee thinks, it'd be I'd recommend it.
Is it about her? It's you said it's a memoir?
Yeah, so it kind of centers around, she ends up finding her birth parents. Oh, wow. And she has 2 sisters, and with one sister she actually like connects with, and it's just interesting. Is it told? Is that the like story that it's following, or is it Yeah, it's like that, and also like she has like a baby of her own, so it's sort of like talking about her experience like with that.
Okay. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Not too long, right? It was. I saw you reading a little bit. Not a huge
Yeah, it
book.
wasn't too long.
Nice. And it's written pretty easy to read as far as the way it's written.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I feel like memoirs, they're my new favorite type of book because they're easy to read.
Oh, okay. Is there another one that you have read or that
Educated? Educated is a good memoir. That's been on like a lot of lists last year though, so I feel like.
You also read that one. Remember that other book you talked about that you had to read for class? Was that a memoir?
Just Mercy. That was also a memoir.
That's also a memoir. Okay. All right. Nice. Ange with the memoirs. Love
memoirs.
It. All right. Mine is not a thing a single thing so much as it's a website. In college, I used to read do you ever read the AV Club?
I remember you used to read it, and I would try to look on it to see if there was anything interesting because I wanted to be just like you, and it was super boring.
I'm honored that you want to be just like me, but I'm very glad that you're not. I used to read it in college, and I think because the AV Club and the Onion, right? The Onion.
I would go on that. I would those were the sites that I would go on my Chromebook in middle school and just leave up in case someone walked past and saw that I was on
it. Nice. I've definitely done stuff like that.
Yeah.
The Onion, right now they're part of, I think it's called IO Media. I'm not sure, but they're now part of the same company. Or it's Geo Media. It used to be Gizmodo. Now it's Geo Media. I think the AV or the Onion, which used to be a newspaper. Did I tell you this? I should do something with it one day because they used to. You have the
book, right?
Well, I have that book, but they used to print it, and they had free copies, right? It was free in Milwaukee, and then I think it was also free in Chicago because I think it was started by people who went to I'm pretty sure it was started by people who went to the University of Madison. And then it kind of grew into a thing in Milwaukee or Chicago. But I used to pick up free ones on my way home from school when I was in high school. And then I think the last print copy came out my senior year of high school, I think. So I have that paper and I should do something with it. Not that it's worth anything, but it just is something I really, really enjoy. But the AV Club, the half of the paper used to be the Onion and the second half would be the AV Club. Now they're just both online. But so I always love the AV Club and sort of the way, because they approach things with a pretty funny tone, right? They're with a pretty funny and lighthearted tone about a lot of stuff. But also I think they find people who write about interesting stuff. And their film critic he went to where we went to high school, Ange.
Yeah.
Wait,
really?
Yeah, he did. He went to East. So he used to do little videos. He doesn't do videos anymore, but I think he still writes for them. But he went to where we went to high school and read it a lot in college. I think the quality, it's become a little bit more clickbaity ever since it got acquired, right? Because now it's part of it's Kotaku, Deadspin, Gizmodo, Jalopnik, Jezebel, Lifehacker. All of those are part of the same media group, Geo Media, and I think the quality has gone down a little bit since that happened. Yeah, I think it's become a little bit more clickbaity. Still good, but they have a thing that they do every week called Podmass, where they recommend a couple podcasts that people are listening to, right? Their writers are listening to, and they tend to find really interesting stuff. One of the things with podcasts is how do you find new podcasts that aren't just, everyone can tell you to listen to WTF or This American Life or Reply All or whatever, right? The big ones everyone knows about, but how do you find that that smaller stuff? And Podmass is something that comes out every week, and generally they do a really good job of honing in on those little things. So I for whatever reason, I came across one of their postings and then have just started going back through 2020 and just the different podcasts they recommended and picking out a few that I want to listen to. So I've been enjoying doing that. Yeah.
Nice.
All right, that's the end of the show.
Wow.
Well, I don't know. I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else to say?
No. I mean, I guess did you see that Netflix is going to have a bunch of movies?
I saw that thing came out, but I haven't watched it yet.
Me neither, but I want to watch it.
I did see an article about season 3 of Umbrella Academy just started filming again, though. So that's exciting because we're going to do
you have a lot of
Umbrella
catching
Academy
up to do.
stuff. Yes, I have a lot of catching up to do, and we're also going to do some comic book reading about that. So that's cool.
Yes.
But I think it's supposed to come out end of the year, so that's down the line. So
that was the podcast.
That's the podcast. You can follow Angela on Instagram at glow.angela. You can follow me on Twitter at JoeyGlowwacky, Joey Glowwacky. You can rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast playing app. You can also email the show by sending your emails to podcast@comicsly.com. All the music you heard in today's episode is the song Something Elated by the band Broke for Free. You can find their music on the Free Music Archive. Coming up on next week's episode is a discussion of the video game Kentucky Route Zero. This is a long, well, ultimately not that long, right? About 10 hours, but a long in the making game. Been developed over about 7 years, 5 episodes. Episodes came out starting in 2013, culminating at the beginning of last year with episode 5 in 2020. So we played through that. We're going to talk about it on next week's episode, and I think that'll be a fun one. I think we both had different, our reactions to that game were quite different. So we're looking forward to that one, and we'll see you next week, everyone. Bye.
Imagine it be peace. Never in my life did I imagine